Hello and welcome to our new series focusing on how I have my WWE 2K24 Universe mode set up. I am using most of the included and unlocked superstars, or at least the ones I've managed to unlock so far, as well as a large number of created wrestlers, or CAWs. Before we get started, I want to point out that I have this universe built according to the video How to Fix Universe Mode in WWE 2K24 by the channel Beach Bites presented by Beachburn Bobs, so that the number of bugs in the game can be worked around. So be sure to check it out if you haven't, and I'll try to provide a link in the description. So I've decided to set up my universe as a relegation league. For those unfamiliar, particularly if you're in the United States and don't follow European soccer, basically all the brands in the overall league fall into a specific hierarchy. One is considered the top brand, then second, third, and so on. At the end of each season, in this case after WrestleMania, the top competitors on each brand under the top one will be promoted into the brand above it, and the bottom competitors will be relegated into the one below. The goal is to make it to the top brand and finish a season as the best of the best. In order to do this, I first needed to decide how many brands I was going to use and establish the hierarchy. NXT is for new superstars and up-and-comers, so that is the brand at the bottom. Raw and SmackDown are essentially on equal ground, so I flipped a coin, and Raw is the top brand, with SmackDown second. But I don't think having only 3 brands is enough. There needs to be more effort to go from the bottom to the top. So I have brought in WCW and ECW as the 3rd and 4th ranked brands respectively. I flipped a coin for them too. So I have a total of 5 brands, with Raw being the top, then SmackDown, WCW, ECW, and finally NXT. I'm spreading them out over all 6 days that the Universe mode allows you to have for a major show, because I'm a crazy glutton for punishment, and I wanted to split NXT into 2. As you can see, I've rescheduled them to go in order from top to bottom, so SmackDown and NXT have swapped days, with a second night of NXT on Saturday, and WCW and ECW coming on Wednesday and Thursday. The next decision is what superstars to use. As I mentioned, I'm using nearly all the ones available to me, both native to the game and created by myself and members of the community. So that adds up to a very large roster, which is another reason to have 5 brands spread out over 6 shows. And even then, I'm not using them all. There are a number of superstars that have multiple versions of themselves, whether as completely different personas or just themselves with a year noted on the name. I decided to use the former, but not the latter, as different personas with different names could be considered different people, even if they look just like someone else. While using, say, Randy Orton and Randy Orton 02 would be confusing and hard to deal with. That said, I do consider Hulk Hogan and Hollywood Hogan different personas, as well as Mighty Molly and Molly Holly. And the Fiend Bray Wyatt is being used despite the fact that regular Bray Wyatt is also being used, but the various Bray Wyatt 20s are not. These are my rules, I make them up. Next, I needed to decide who gets to be on the top brand, who starts in the bottom, and everywhere in between. Since created wrestlers are new to the league, they are automatically considered to start lower than everyone native to the game, even if those created wrestlers are based on real people. So I listed all the superstars native to the game, separating them into men's and women's divisions, and sorted them by their overall rating. Ties were broken by a random number. After that, all the created superstars were listed and sorted in the same way. So the lowest rated real superstar is listed just ahead of the highest rated created superstar. That will certainly make for some interesting matches, if by interesting I mean utter domination. But it will all sort out eventually. This will also mean that you'll see some of them on brands you're not used to seeing them on. That's to be expected with how I've conceived this, so hopefully it isn't too big a deal for anyone following along. So how many superstars are on each roster? I wanted everything to be as uniform as possible, while also looking ahead to Royal Rumble, which each of the brands will participate in. More on that later. So I decided for the top 4 brands, they would each have 25 men and 25 women, while one of the NXT brands will have 40 men and the other will have 40 women. This goes along with my plan for each of the top 4 brands to have 2 singles championships and 1 tag championships for both the men and women, for a total of 6 belts each. Both NXT brands will have 1 tag belt and 3 individual championships. There will be 3 separate Royal Rumble PLEs, with Raw and SmackDown hosting one, WCW and ECW hosting another, and the NXTs hosting the third. With 15 men and 15 women from each of the top 4 brands, and 30 from each NXT, all involved in the Royal Rumble matches, that leaves just enough left over to defend their belts at the same shows. Technically, I could have gone as low as 23 men and women in each of the top 4 brands, but 25 leads to a nice round 50. With this concept, I of course had to fill in all of the available creator wrestler slots that I have. And because of the imbalance in the number of men and women, nearly all of them are female superstars. To spotlight the need, there are 19 men and 12 women who are currently not being used and will be rotated into NXT in subsequent seasons. I only have 4 male created wrestlers, and they're all in that limbo zone because, as I mentioned, they're all listed below the existing ones. By contrast, on the women's side, I was only able to fill in Raw and SmackDown with the existing superstars, with a few more on WCW before needing to start adding their created ones. So the entirety of NXT and ECW and most of WCW on the women's side will be created wrestlers, most of whom you've never heard of. On the men's side, it will be a few seasons before you see any of the created ones. Speaking of the created wrestlers, while I did make quite a few, making 100 of them is a bit daunting. So I did download a lot of them, and I've listed who I'm using and their creators in the description. I've also downloaded some shows and title belts, which should also be in the description. I want to thank all of the creators for sharing them so that I can use them in this universe. So how exactly am I going to determine who gets promoted and relegated between the different brands at the end of the season? Since I'm a numbers geek and we've established that I'm a glutton for punishment, I've created a spreadsheet where I'm tracking everyone's wins and losses, as well as several different bonus points that they can earn. The dotted lines show the promotion and relegation zones. Anyone finishing the season in the spots above the upper dotted line gets promoted, while anyone finishing below the lower one gets relegated. Oh, and since I don't think I've mentioned this yet, I intend this to be entirely CPU versus CPU, so I don't put too much weight into who wins and who loses. Since I plan to share the standings at the end of each in-game week, I'll go over how they're calculated. If you don't care about the numbers, feel free to skip to the next section. I've divided the point system, and on the spreadsheet, the points are in the green column on the right. The gray column on the left is simply how many matches the superstar has competed in. All wins are worth 3 points. All losses will deduct 1 point. The next several columns all denote different special matches, and in this context, I consider any match that isn't a basic 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, or 4-on-4 match using the standard rules to be special. So any deviation in the rules or having more than 2 individuals or teams constitutes a special match. So if there are 2 or 3 individuals or teams in a special match, a win is worth an additional point. It's 2 points if there are 4 or 5, 3 if there are 6, and 4 points if there are 8 competitors. You may have noticed a pattern here. The bonus points are essentially half the number of individuals or teams in the match. So that brings us to the column marked RR for Royal Rumble. Since there are 30 competitors in that match, winning it brings an extra 15 points. There'll be a nice big boost, plus getting an automatic title shot. Speaking of title shots, the next column is for championship wins. It's 2 bonus points for winning a championship match, whether you're winning the belt or defending it, so long as the winner ends up with the belt afterward. That's a caveat I added, which I call the champion's advantage. If a challenger wins by countout or disqualification, they win the match but not the title, so they don't get the championship bonus points. If a champion wins in one of those ways, they keep the belt and therefore get the bonus points. If the champion loses in one of those ways, no one gets the championship bonus points because losers never get bonus points. Again, these are my rules, I make them up. The last column is for wins at a PLE, which gives an additional bonus point. Any win at a PLE, regardless of what it is, gets this point. Since most title shots come at PLEs, a championship win would get a total of 6 points. 3 for the win, 2 for the championship, 1 for it being a PLE. And that's assuming it's not also a special match, which would garner even more. As an example, here's how winning a Royal Rumble would affect them. 3 points for the win, 1 more for it being at a PLE, and 15 for the Rumble itself, for a total of 19. By the way, when it comes time for the Royal Rumble matches, I will only be adding the win to the standings. I really don't feel like tracking the 29 wrestlers per match that lose it, so none of them will get the 1 point penalty for the loss. So with all the titles on each brand, how do I determine who fits into which division? Well, anyone who should be in the tag division goes there, and I'll talk about that in a bit. For everyone else, I use the current standings according to my spreadsheet. My initial setup here is again based on their overall ratings and how they fell in my original sorting of this, but I will reevaluate and change who is in which division every 3 in-game months. So at the end of July, October, January, and April, I'll be adjusting the divisions. On the tag titles, I wanted to be sure that we have a legitimate tag division for both the men and the women on all the brands. So for the top 4 brands, there will always be 5 teams for both the men and the women, with the remaining superstars on the roster going into the individual divisions. Each NXT show has 8 teams. Because there are only so many existing tag teams, especially on the women's side, and my initial setup has separated some tag team partners from each other, I had to create a bunch of new teams. I've had to use whoever I currently have on each brand, so if you see any where you're thinking that I put together a couple of completely incompatible partners, well, I did the best I could. I also had to make modifications to a few existing teams because they included a superstar with a year in the name, and as I said earlier, I'm not using any of those. One of these is Weapons of Mass Destruction, which I really didn't want to change, and I considered actually swapping regular John Cena and Bray Wyatt out for their 2020 versions that are default to the team. But both of those 2020 versions are rated quite a bit lower than the regular versions, and would have put them at a disadvantage since they're both on Raw. You'll notice I also relied a bit on the women's MyRise, using all the outfits you unlock in the Darkness storyline, as well as another team using the silly Totally Beautiful Duo moniker, because why not? Now let's look at the calendar, and yes, I do have something scheduled literally every day. Like I said, I'm crazy. Before we look at the PLEs, yes, I'm already on the first Thursday of the month. No, I didn't already play the others, but this is a result of the initial fixing of the universe mode from the How to Fix video I mentioned earlier. But to be sure nothing is missed, I am playing CPU versus CPU exhibition matches for the 3 skipped shows. So yes, there is a PLE every single week. Definitely not recommended, but I'm doing it anyway. Working backward, the final PLE of the month will always be hosted by Raw and SmackDown. The third one will be hosted by WCW and ECW, and the second will be the NXTs. The first of the month are the ones I call the cash grabs. They'll always be hosted by just one brand and will rotate between them from month to month. So each of them will host 2 shows per year, once in the first half and the other in the second. I guess NXT gets 4 since there are 2 of them. But all of these will be shorter than the others and will be made up almost entirely of special matches, including a number of them that I created. Because of this schedule, I tried to keep the existing PLEs as close to their default positions as possible, with 1 or 2 notable exceptions. So I tried to keep any spring-based PLEs in May, as well as Backlash since it's the first Raw/SmackDown PLE after WrestleMania. In June, all the PLEs besides the first one are Money in the Bank, so that each brand will have a briefcase being carried around by someone. Each of these will have one Money in the Bank match for the men and another for the women. NXT will always have one person from both the men and women's divisions winning a briefcase, but since all the other events are shared by different brands, one brand will have a men's match and the other will have a women's. I may change which ones from season to season. July keeps the NXT Great American Bash, and the first reevaluation of the singles championship divisions comes after Night of Champions. August gets the summer-themed PLEs, including SummerSlam. We'll find Payback and NXT Battleground in September, as well as ECW Massacre and 34th Street. October gets 2 different Halloween Havocs, and the second reorganization of the title divisions comes after Fastlane. Survivor Series remains in November, as well as the ECW November to Remember. I filled in December with NXT Roadblock, WCW Starrcade, and Bad Blood. So 2 different PLEs I downloaded from the community. You'll notice that I moved Royal Rumble out of January and replaced it with another show I downloaded. This is mainly because of how few PLEs there are between January and April otherwise. But the third update of the title divisions happens after King and Queen of the Ring. February features the Elimination Chamber, as well as NXT Vengeance and WCW Thunder. Then we reach March, which is where I stuck all of the Royal Rumbles. This gives a more direct relation to the winners of the Rumble going to WrestleMania the next month, or to the other PLEs since only Raw and SmackDown get that one. So in April, in addition to finishing with WrestleMania, NXT gets Stand and Deliver, and WCW and ECW get Guilty as Charged. All of them will feature the Royal Rumble winners and title matches. And once WrestleMania is over, the promotions and relegations happen, which will require another update to the title divisions, and likely will force me to create and disband tag teams as well. So after all of that, there is still one unanswered question as far as I know. If the top superstars in all the brands below Raw get promotions to the next level, what does the top superstar of Raw get? I mentioned that the goal was to be the best of the best, but what do you get out of it? After all, with the standings as they are, the one at the top won't necessarily be a title holder, especially if they lose the belt at WrestleMania. When it's all said and done, the top superstar in both the men's and women's divisions will be awarded the seasonal championship belt. This belt isn't won or lost in any match, and can only be won by coming in first place on Raw. They'll enter the ring with it all the following year, showing everyone that they're the best. The only way to keep it after that is to come in first place again. Otherwise, it'll be awarded to the new winner. Because I'll be trying to keep tag teams fighting only as teams and not as individuals for most of the season, they'll always have identical spots in the standings, so it's possible they may end up on the line for promotions and relegations, potentially splitting them up the following season. Or they may tie for the top spot on Raw. So towards the end of the season, I may start giving them individual matches just to try to get a little separation in case I have to split them up or give one of them the seasonal title. Going forward, I currently don't plan on switching over to WWE 2K25 when it becomes available, since I'd have to start all over from scratch and setting all of this up is a lot of work. So it's quite possible I'll be continuing this series even after this game is obsolete. And that's pretty much everything. If you sat through this whole thing, I thank you and hope you'll join us in our next video and we'll start this up. Due to how many matches there are, which is entirely my fault for filling up the calendar so much, my current plan is to briefly go over the results of the main shows of the week and then show you the matches of the PLE for that week. So we should have the results from the first week of ECW and the NXTs, plus the first full PLE, which is the cash grab for the NXT women. If it's already available, we'll link it here. We'll see you next time.